that shall not be named. We're here with people from around the country, almost internationally, but Lou has come back from Canada. We're hoping to, increase our international audience. So welcome to everybody. We have a lot of people here online. Welcome to Larry and Jane and Lou and Jeff and Gail and Michael, Flossie and Arnold. And Arnold's joining in, and if he can't get in, I know he's watching on Zoom. So I hope everybody's doing good. I hope everybody had a good vacation. Lou just came back from Canada. Michael,
Newfoundland.
Huh?
Newfoundland.
That's in Canada.
Newfoundland. Oh,
That is in Canada.
it's cool there.
It was cold and rainy and foggy. It was
awesome.
But I saw lots of puffins and lots of gannets, which is what I went to see.
I came back from Texas. Gail, anybody else just coming back from out of town?
Yeah, I came back from New York and Washington.
New York. Gail, I couldn't hear what you said.
I'm leaving soon. I'm going to Florida on one trip and then to Philadelphia on another.
Nice. I hope everybody has a good time. Just got back again from Texas. Good to be back.
So it's Texas.
Texas was amazing. We were in the hill country outside San Antonio and just for a couple of days in Houston, seeing some family and friends. So first big trip with the kids, and it went swimmingly well.
Good.
That was great.
Good for you.
Don't count on it in the future.
Yes, amen. Well, it was very good because my son is basically a COVID kid, so a lot of my family had never met him, and they'd only met my daughter when she was a baby. So now they actually got to see two human beings who could talk and hang out. So it was great. So today we're going to talk a little bit about Jewish symbols because it's something we hadn't talked about. So obviously when we talk about Jewish symbols, there's a few that stick out. The most famous Jewish symbol of all today, of course, is the Star of David. And that is something we're going to talk about. It is considered to be the symbol of Judaism. The hexagram is, of course, on the flag of Israel. If anybody sees it, they think somebody Jewish. People wear it on their necklaces, on earrings. They have it on shirts. It's on synagogues. It's on actually non-Jewish houses of worship as well. It's on Jewish buildings. So the double triangle or inverted triangle is the most famous Jewish symbol. However, it is not considered the symbol of Judaism originally. That is by far the newest of the symbols, by far. So it is called the Star of David, but there's absolutely no evidence at all that it was ever connected to King David. Our first glimpses of it don't come till maybe 1,000 years after David had died. So we'll talk about that at the end. So let's talk about what the actual symbols of Judaism are. And there's a couple of them biblically that we continue to look at and use. Some are inferred and some are actually seen. So the obvious one that is seen, of course, is the menorah. But we're going to talk about some of the other ones as well. So let's talk first about this famous prayer, a prayer that we see in Deuteronomy. Hear, O Israel, the eternal is our God, the eternal God is one. It's a Shema. You will love God with all your heart, and these words will be on your heart. You shall teach them to your children, and you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be an ornament between your eyes, and you shall inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So right there we have two ancient symbols. One of them, or maybe both of them, were used way back when, but we have inferred from this passage that we should have two symbols. At least some have. What are the two symbols that are inferred from this passage that actually you put the passage in it? One is the
Tefillin.
The mezuzah and tefillin. Mezuzah and tefillin, both of them, you put this passage from Deuteronomy, the Shema and the Vehafta, in it. And the tefillin, there's two pieces that are separated, and the mezuzah, of course, it's placed inside. So now it does not say right here, literally, that you're supposed to put it in a mezuzah, but it's a little bit more obvious when you say, and you shall inscribe them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. It doesn't go literally as clearly that you're supposed to put it up all around your house and do this, but it can be taken literally that you're supposed to actually do something. The first one, and you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be ornaments between your eyes. That is much more vague. So that, because obviously, how do you put it on your hand? How do you put it on your ornament between your heart? They also say it'd be on your heart. So how do you put it on your hand, your heart, and your head is basically a question which we know the answer to. But when do we know these answers? Because a lot of people debate when we actually started doing the mezuzah and when we started tefillin. So Rambam, who is the great Ramban, the great Nachmanides, not Maimonides, but Nachmanides, who was a commentator a century later in Spain, said, the awesome signs and wonders performed by God in Egypt provide true testimony to belief in God. However, God does not perform such signs or wonders in every generation. He therefore commanded us to perpetually commemorate that which we have seen, communicate to our kids. God further commanded us to transcribe on our hands and between our eyes all that we've seen in the matter of signs and wonders, and to write in the doorposts of our house. So we see that we're doing just this in the 13th century. So in Spain in the 13th century, they're already probably doing tefillin and the mezuzah. So this is proof or evidence that we're doing these things already. But how much earlier can we go? How many of us have also a mezuzah on our door? Some of them have become very popular. The mezuzah has become probably the most popular symbol to put on your house. Jews who are very traditional and less traditional put the mezuzah on. Some just to put a symbol. Some put it on the house and they just put on a photographed or a Xerox copy of the text. What is traditionally do? You actually get an actual text that is written. Just like a scribe writes a Torah, they spend probably more time writing the parchment for the mezuzah. That's why they all wear glasses. That's why all the scribes wear glasses from early age, because they spend all their time writing very small letters. And, you can get the really small and the medium small and the large small and the super small. But they have to all be written by hand in the same way you scribe a Torah. So when it comes to our house, traditionally it says, even we see from Nachmanides, you put it on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now that can be also taken in different ways. For instance, when you see in the original text on the doorposts of your house, what does that mean to us? What does a doorpost mean?
Your front door?
It could mean logically what we would probably take it as our front door or our front gate. When you enter, because it's all about entering. So most Jews will put it on the front door. Some will have the text that is photocopied or Xeroxed. Others will have the text that is written. What must be on the mezuzah? Traditionally, only one thing needs to be on it, the shin. Some would put shin, daled, yud, the Shaddai, another word for God, but you just have to have the shin. Does it have to be rectangular and leaning? The answer is no. There are different traditions on how you put it. What's won out in mostly the Ashkenazic world is it's in a rectangular thing that is leaning inside. So God's going inside, a compromise between some who said it should be one way or the other. But it doesn't have to be a rectangular object. That's a more modern or later interpretation, because it doesn't say in the text it's got to be rectangular. It doesn't say in the text it has to have the name of God or the letter of God on it. It doesn't say any of this. This is what we have figured out through the years. And so in the Talmud, there is a story that I'm going to read. This is the Talmud, of course, is written 3rd through 6th century in Babylon. When Onkelos, the son of Callimus, converted to Judaism, the Roman emperor sent a company of soldiers after them. He enticed them by citing scriptural verses, and they too converted. The emperor then sent a second troop of soldiers after him, but forewarned them not to converse with Onkelos. As they were about to take him, he said to them, I would like to ask you something. In a procession, the torchbearer carries the light in front of the royal litter. The officer behind the litter carries the light in front of the commander in front of the chief general in front of the governor. Does the governor, however, carry the torch before the people? They said to him, no. He responded, but God does carry the light before the people of Israel, for scripture says that God went before them day. Then all of them convert him. The emperor sent a third group of soldiers to fetch him, but this time he said to them not to say anything to Onkelos. As they were escorting him away, Onkelos saw the mezuzah affixed to the doorpost and placed his hand upon it. What is this? He asked him. You tell us, they responded. He said to them, it is generally customary for a mortal king to safely sit within his palace, while his servants guard him from without. The Holy One, blessed be he, however, guards his servants while they dwell within. As the verse states, God will guard your going, your coming from this time forth and forever. They then converted, and the emperor sent no more people for Onkelos. What does this tell us? It's a very funny story.
Whoa.
4 groups. Basically, the emperor sends people to this convert. They convert. The next group converts. The next group converts. And the last group, they see him place his hand on the doorpost and say something. And they say, what are you doing? And he says, basically, it is God protecting people on the inside. This is a very early, very specific, very literal piece of evidence that we've been using the mezuzah since the Babylonian period. So, whereas before we see hints, here we say that they're actually doing it. Excuse me. So the mezuzah, we know, has been put on the doorposts of Jewish homes at least, or since at least 1,500 years ago, minimally 1,500 years ago. And that is a pretty impressive streak to show you that that is not a new tradition by any sense. It is a tradition that has been done in time periods when Jews were not always accepted, and yet we've continued to do it. So we know for sure that the mezuzah has been on the doorposts of homes literally since at least 500. They don't always know when the exact texts of the Talmud were written. So that's a pretty good long time, 1,500 years we've had. Now, did they have the exact Shema and Ve'ahavta in that doorpost thing? Did that mezuzah, which just means doorpost, have the shin on it? We don't know that. It doesn't say it, although archaeological evidence could say sometimes it did, sometimes it didn't. But what we see is the mezuzah is an ancient symbol. Some would say we've been doing it for 3,000 years, but we can prove we've been doing it for almost 2,000. Larry.
Yeah, so just get back to the time scale for a second. When the Jews were in Egypt, for example, then there was no mezuzah on the doorposts.
Right.
That we're aware of, but yet it is in the book of Deuteronomy, right?
Right.
And yet, so that was a commandment that was not really obeyed, or were there other kinds of markings of Jewish houses?
That is a very good question. We don't have the evidence for it, but now let's look back to the text. It says to put it there, but does it mean it literally? There are a lot of things the text says. It could mean spiritually. When you go in your house, you know this is a holy place. So it could, it doesn't necessarily mean there was a symbol originally. Now, in Egypt, we hadn't been given the laws yet, so probably didn't have it then. Now, when Deuteronomy comes out is a debate, but there are a lot of people who believe the book of Deuteronomy is written right before the Babylonian exile, circa 620 BCE, so 2,600 years ago. King Josiah is called because somebody found a book which was legitimized by the prophetess Huldah, and this book he was told he had to read every year. Many people believe it's the book of Deuteronomy because it has specific rules for the kings in it. If that is true, then probably the earliest time we would have been having the mezuzah would have been around this time, circa 600 BCE. So 2,600 years ago would have been the earliest, although we don't have any evidence of that. But from the textual perspective, if you believe that the book of Deuteronomy was that book given to King Josiah, then that is the case. That would be the earliest. The history of it is very, very old, but we're not sure how old it is. So we do know for sure it's at least 1,500 to 2,000 years old, because we have the text in the Talmud and we have some evidence of it being found. Not all of them, of course, look like the ones we have. But what we see also is the mezuzah for us is a reminder that God is there. God expects us to find commandments, and we're supposed to teach our to our kids. But was it always a reminder? Because what does it say in the text we just read? And I'll read that part again. The Holy One, blessed be He, guards His servant while they dwell within. Guard, what does that mean to us? When it says God guards you, what does that mean that mezuzah may have been to a lot of people? Some sort of protection amulet. Maybe against the evil eye, before the evil eye. So the mezuzah, in this sense, almost seems like it's some sort of godly force field that is protecting the people inside, more of an amulet, whereas today we don't use it that way, or a lot of us don't, Michael.
Just an anecdote about, I have a non-Jewish neighbor who has a mezuzah on her door because she thinks it's good luck. And apparently she has friends who do the same thing. Okay.
The more people who support us, and I like it. I love it. I have put it on the doorposts of non-Jews before. I'm happy to do it. You know why? Because it doesn't say in the text it's only for Jews. It says it's, to honor God, keep commandments, protect us. So the more people who do it, the people who probably do it are probably very nice to Jews and support us. So I appreciate that. So the Sephardic Jews do have they do add a little bit more to the text. They put it on it. Otherwise, they do very similarly. But the origin of the mezuzah is this passage. But we have to figure out, when was the passage written? When was Deuteronomy, the book of Deuteronomy, written? And when did they actually take this literally, as we're supposed to put something on the doorposts of our house? That is still a great debate. And again, we know for sure 1,500 years ago, because it's in the Talmud. But we don't know much earlier if they were doing it. There are some older ones, but not that much before this period, the Talmudic period. So now, I'm sorry, go ahead.
The the custom among some Jewish groups of kissing the mezuzah, touching it, acknowledging it. When did that come about? Was that?
That's a good question. I don't know when exactly the kissing and touching it came about. However, we do know from this very particular Talmudic passage that Onkelos did do that. He placed his hand on it. Now, was that to, in the story, he places his hand on it so that the Roman soldiers will ask him what he's doing so he can convince them to convert. But probably very likely that tradition of touching it was already in play when this piece was written in the Talmud. So we've probably been at least touching and kissing it also for 1,500 years, or the people took this story and started doing it afterwards, maybe. But again, when exactly the origin of the first person to kiss the mezuzah, that is beyond us, probably will beyond our understanding, that could happen whenever. So, but we know it's in this passage that he does touch it. So this is the most important passage in the Talmud for the mezuzah because it gives almost without, almost conclusively that there was something on the door that people were touching. And so, Gail.
So this may be a stupid question.
No stupid questions, only stupid answers for me.
Is there any relationship between the sign that was put on the doors when the Jews were in Egypt and the mezuzah?
That is probably very true. There's almost, it's not stated, but that is the most famous moment of the doorpost, was the putting of the blood to protect us. It is not a coincidence that they say probably doorposts use the same word here. So very likely that is the reason, one of the reasons that it's on the doorpost as opposed to outside the house on inside. Now, as to where the mezuzah, that's a really good, I should have mentioned that. That's really good. I forgot about that. Excellent. The tradition, though, of doorpost has, of course, because we're Jewish, created debate. What is the doorpost? Flossie said, or Lou said, I think Lou said on the front door of your house. That is what most people assume, but it doesn't say mezuzah only on the front door. It says, it makes it very obvious they're referring to the front because it also says gate, but we have a lot of doorposts in our house. And so later the decision was made. It's basically like saying, yes, it probably means the front of the house, but why take a chance? We take the widest view. And so what that has been taken by a lot of sages is that it goes on every doorpost in the house, certainly the doorpost, especially where you enter, because you have a back to our front door, maybe other, but you can put it in other places. Some ascribe to that belief that we need to put on every doorpost. Others believe only the entrances. Others believe only the front entrance. But if you do put it on the doorpost of your house, it goes on every room except for two, except for the closet and the bathroom. And in a synagogue, it would go on every door except for the closet, the bathroom. What's the only other door in a synagogue where you wouldn't have to put it on?
The front door, which is kind of paradoxical.
Close, not the front door of the sanctuary. Yes, exactly. The sanctuary. Like if you came into our building, we would have it on the entrance to the building. But when you go into the sanctuary, you don't have to have it there because what's already in the sanctuary? The Torah, which has that piece already in it. Well, you can still do it. We do it on most places still do it anyway. So now there's always other questions because it's not so easy. Like in my house, we have the small dining room and the kitchen, but the kitchen doesn't have a door you open. It's like one of those push doors that goes back and forth. Do we put it on that door there? Because the door, the door is just push it. We usually just leave it open. Or what if you have, like we have, or some people have, a living room and then a dining room right next to each other, but there's no door, but there is some sort of leaning in of the wall that shows it's a separate room. Is that, and if you're gonna do that, where do you put it? You know, do you put it on the door post facing into the living room or on the doorpost facing into the dining room? So you can see all of these debates continue. What if you have like in Savannah, I don't know if it's as popular in South Carolina, I imagine it is, in some of the older homes, you have the home and then you have like the porch, but the porch has like a door, but it's really outside, it's not air conditioned or anything. You put it on that porch door as well, because it's not really a door to the house, it's a door to the porch, because then you have another door to the house. So do we put it on the porch door?
That's sort of like a gate.
Yeah, exactly. Or would you consider that a gate? Very good, Jeff. Not only that, mezuzahs are generally not that expensive. You can get expensive ones, obviously, or inexpensive ones. The parchment is not cheap. It's $40. If you have 10 rooms in your house, guess what? You don't have to be a mathematician to know that 40 times 10 is exactly a lot of money. So you have to be able to afford it. What if you cannot afford it for all those rooms? What if you cannot even afford it for one? So again, a lot of debates. Although if you usually have 10 doors, you probably have enough money to afford $400. But on the very basic home, you've got the entrance, you got the back door, you've got 1 or 2 bedrooms, you got the living room. So you're going to have 6 or 7 on a basic home. Larry.
Yeah, that kind of brings up the question I wanted to ask about. Some people call some of the mezuzahs kosher and non-kosher, but the only real requirement apparently is that it have a shin on the outside.
Right.
So some of these really decorative ones are not what I consider to be kosher. I always thought kosher and non-kosher meant whether it was a script on parchment and was handwritten or whether it was a Xerox copy.
Yeah. Now, actually, for the actual mezuzah itself, all you need to have is the shin. I mean, it's real easy. I can make something and then actually put it in on a marker, and that is legitimate. As long as it's a marker, it's on a permanent marker, then that would count as okay.
It doesn't have to have the inscription inside.
Right. The kosher part comes from the inside. That means the parchment is handwritten and it's still legible. So that's why they check it every year. You don't have to really check it too often if it's on the inside of your house, if it's an air-conditioned home. But it's on the outside of your house, that's where you got to check it, you know. And you don't have to check it like every year, every 5-10 years, just to make sure the parchment is still legible. But it should last, inside your house, it should last a very long time. So when they say it's not kosher, it basically means you probably have a Xerox copy instead of paying the $40 for the actual handwritten one. But that's up to what you consider, you know. Now, if you're not Jewish, can you enter a home that doesn't have a kosher scroll? The answer is that's also debate. Because let's say I'm very traditional, but I got to go to the bank, or I got to go to the parking, you know, I owe parking tickets, or I got to go to the library. They're not going to have mezuzot on these places. You know, you're doing business with somebody, you go to their place of business, they're not going to. So obviously you can enter places without a mezuzah. There's nothing that says you only can enter homes with them. Somebody might say, I won't go to your home because you don't have a mezuzah and you're Jewish. Yeah, maybe because you don't have a kosher home would be more likely. I won't eat there. But really, you can go any place. You're not limited to going into a building with a mezuzah on it. Otherwise, we would be limited beyond, you know, you're asked to go to the police station, you know, mezuzah there. You know, the czar doesn't want you to come to his palace. You know, you're going to the palace.
What about right side or left side or height of the mezuzah so that, you know, a short person can reach it? Is there anything specified there, or?
Very much so. It's specified to be as you enter, usually on the right, going in, slanted. Why? Because it doesn't always have to be that way, because sometimes we know it's not possible, because that's where it became traditional, where the doors mostly are. So if you look around doors around the world, they're generally the same, coming from the same place, because most people, I think, are right-handed. That's probably why. But that's where, but you can put it anywhere. If you put it on another place nearby, then it's still fine. Some places you may not be able to put it on the inside of the doorpost, so you put it on the outside, especially if it was, Formica and you don't want to use tape. So there are rules, but the rules are easily changed if the need, because obviously, in few doors, you can't do it a certain way. But generally, that's where you put it. You go in on the right in a reachable position. So that could mean various things. Obviously, for a children's room, you can put it lower because that is the main person in the room. But generally, put it in an adult place where adults can reach it. So
do you touch it when you leave as well as when you enter?
Traditionally, you can, yes. Traditionally, you can do it anytime you leave or enter a building. Now, do you do it for every room or for the front door? That's up to you. But some people you'll see do it, and some people you won't. But again, there's nothing about touching it in the Bible, but there is that piece we just read from the Talmud on Onkelos, which is kind of it's not the central piece on the discussion of the mezuzah. It's a central piece to prove that it goes back really far. So if you're studying the mezuzah, that's not a piece you'll spend as much time with. That's more just to say, hey, we know it. We've been doing it for that long for, people who care about that. So the mezuzah obviously is an ancient symbol. Another ancient symbol that is used also comes very specifically from the Bible. In several places, including Numbers. Speak to the children of Israel and say to them, they will make fringes on the corner of their garments. Throughout their generations, they shall affix a thread of sky blue on the fringe of each corner. This shall be fringes for you. When you see it, you remember all the commandments of the Eternal to perform them, and you shall not wander after your hearts, after eyes, which are going to stray. So what we see is very early on, probably we're doing this because obviously everybody's wearing clothing, something to do with the fringes of your corners of your garments. You're supposed to have fringes. It doesn't tell in the Bible about how the knots go. It does say to remember the commandments, but remember in the Bible, that never says there's 613 commandments. That's something that's extrapolated later. It says you're supposed to put it on the fringes of your garments, and it gives you one very specific color. What is the color? Blue, some sort of blue. Now, that's a very interesting discussion because if we go into an Orthodox synagogue, what is the color of the tallis they use?
Black, usually.
Black.
White and black.
White and black. Now, that is a very, very common thing. You go to an Orthodox synagogue, a conservative synagogue, most of the time you're going to see white with black lines. Why is it black when it very specifically says blue? The answer is because we don't know what blue means in this context. So again, as time changes, names change. Does blue actually mean blue today as it did thousands of years ago? Also, what shade of blue? There's a lot of shades of blue. At some point, that blue disappeared. Probably they believe it comes from like a mollusk or something from the ocean that went extinct. And so we are not capable of discovering that exact blue. So what do you see people who are more traditional do? They make it black because black is a color with everything in it. For other people, they do all sorts of colors because we can't find the blue. You will see a lot of people with the blue. Where do we see the blue most famously? That represents the tallis. The most
Flag.
famous, the what?
Flag.
Exactly, the flag of Israel, which is basically based on the tallis. Let's take the tallis and put the Star of David in the middle of it. But again, they chose a beautiful color of blue. We don't know, there's lots of blues. They chose a very nice color. It's easy to find, easily identifiable, but we don't know what the original blue was. Also, we don't know anything about what the fringes should look like. From the Zalman Schachter, the talit, the sheet of cloth in which we wrap ourselves during the prayers, serves as a sheath for our aura of energy. Underneath the talit, we create ourselves a safe and cozy space in which to meet God like a small child that curls up with his family. Or perhaps like a towel that's wrapped around us when we change clothes, or some sort of armor to shield us. What does the tefillin mean? It means to represent, the tallis represents the commandments, but there are no specific rules for them. So that means rules have to be created. And in the end, they create two types of tallises. There's the tallis that you wear as clothing. So you'll see people who walk around and they have the fringes on their clothing. It's kind of like a vest, like a poncho that goes over your head that has fringes, and you wear it every day to represent remembering the commandments. But then you have the talit that you wear only through prayer, only on morning prayer, except for Yom Kippur. And that's a separate tallis. Traditionally, only men wear it, even though it doesn't say that here. It comes out later, but in the modern world, women will wear it too. In the Reform movement, we gave up the tallis in the 19th century. We wanted to be more American. It has made a big comeback. So if you come to our synagogue, whereas 40 years ago, there would not have been a single person wearing a tallis, now you'll see several people wearing a tallis at every service. Larry.
Getting back to the fringes for a moment and differentiating that from the tallis, were the fringes intended to purposely identify a person as being Jewish then? Was that the main purpose, is you could look at that person and say, yes, he's Jewish because you could see fringes on his clothing?
I think that is definitely the case for for the mezuzah and the tallis. I think it definitely had that kind of effect. There was a reason we wanted to keep ourselves apart, to keep our belief system contained without letting people leave and getting these other ones. So yes, I definitely think that's part of it. Still to this day, all the sense. Well, one of the reasons I wear the yarmulke, which we'll talk about in a second, is because it announces to others. Michael.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. If you're wearing the Orthodox, community, if they wear tzitzis during the day, that's kind of permanent. But yet for tefillin, they don't, you don't walk around with tefillin on you. And, I think it's not an unreasonable thing to ask why.
That's a good question.
Then the other question is, it also kind of relates to tefillin, is why you don't put tefillin on Shabbat and holidays, but yet you wear a talit, but you only wear a talit in synagogue during the day.
Right.
God, so many rules.
So many rules. And now let's go over those questions. We'll get to tefillin in a little bit, and if we have time, we may not get to tefillin. We may have to do tefillin next week because I want to do the tallis and one other thing. But that's an excellent question. I think the most obvious answer is the best answer. If you walk around with tefillin, you'll look ridiculous. Quite frankly, you can wear the fringes and it's not, you see it's on the, it's by your waist. But tefillin, if you want to work and live in society, it really looks silly. It's not silly to us, but it is because even in the Jewish world, if you walk around with tefillin, you look like a moron. You really only use it during the prayers, the service, and that's it. You're not supposed to walk around with it. Whereas the fringes, you can. So obviously there are other texts as to why you don't do it. One of the reasons you don't do it Shabbat is because it may entitle work, or you have to carry it. That would probably be one of them, although you could leave it at synagogue, obviously, but you don't always pray at the synagogue. You may pray at home. So that would need you to have several, and that can be pricey. So, plus there's some wrapping involved. It may be considered work. But yes, the tefillin is, now whereas the tallis has made a big comeback in the conservative and reform world, the tefillin never did. There's still a few Reform Jews and a little bit more conservative Jews who do it, but it never made the big comeback that everybody else. Mostly in the Reform world because we gather together on the Sabbath to pray, which is the one day it's not allowed in holidays. And so we don't have a weekly or daily minyan here. That means we're not going to have tefillin. So also, we build our synagogue around the idea of being welcoming to people, non-Jews, family members who are not Jewish, and it's a very strange tradition. Also, you put it on your head and you put it on your arm to reach your heart, but it's not actually on your heart, which it says. It's actually on your arm. It does say put it on your arm, but so, and also a lot of people do not take some of these texts literally. They take it as reminders. So basically the tallis, the talit, the mezuzah, and tefillin are simple, just symbols to remind us to do something. When you see a mezuzah, it reminds you keep God's commandments. When you put tefillin on, when you put on the tallis, reminds us to keep God's commandments. Others say, well, we don't need, the symbols are just reminders. Let's have other reminders. Plus, if we have the mezuzah, we see that all the time. That's every day. So there's a lot of reasons. Also, as to the tefillin, we do have tefillin from, very long time ago. And there's some very similar, but there's also some that are different. So again, there's also different ways to put on the tefillin depending on where you're from. This part in Eastern Europe, this part, and there's some subtle differences how you do it. So from the Talmud we read, our rabbis taught, beloved are Israel, the Holy One, blessed be He, has surrounded them with mitzvot, tefillin on their heads, tefillin on their arms, tzitzit on the garments, and a mezuzah upon the doorposts. Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov said, whoever has tefillin on his head, tefillin on his arm, tzitzit on his garment, and mezuzah on his doorpost can be sure he will not sin. So obviously this from the Talmud, again, 300, 400, 500, sometime in that period, shows that we were taking these symbols literally already.
Like inside
Yes,
inside the mezuzah, inside the box, is there a prayer? Isn't there some prayer that's similar to a mezuzah?
The tefillin and mezuzah have the same thing in it. The tefillin just has it in two sections, and the mezuzah has it in one.
But in the box, in the little
box,
that's
yeah,
on your head and on your arm, there is a
Right.
prayer in there.
Yeah, there is on one of there's two boxes of tefillin. One of it is similar to what the mezuzah have. The others, it's split into different sections. So, but yes, it's the same prayers for tefillin and for the mezuzah. But again, what we see here is we find in the book of Deuteronomy, we find the Talmud and Numbers, which is an earlier book, but we don't have evidence that it was used literally until the Babylonian time, I believe. So that is really important for us to understand that they are old traditions based on the Bible. But except for maybe the fringes on the corner, which they may have been doing, we don't have proof of that. Obviously, we don't have clothing from 3,000 years ago. This may have been thought of as symbolic until at some point we tried to take it literally. Who knows when that happened? Who knows? They could have been using tefillin and a talis and a mezuzah, 3,000 years ago. We just don't have evidence of it. Now, the most prominent of the symbols, and we're not going to have time to get to the Star of David. We'll do that next week. But the most prominent symbol that announces someone as being Jewish is not the tallis, not tefillin, not the mezuzah, not the Star of David, maybe the Star of David, but not as much, and not the menorah. It is the yarmulke. That is the most easiest way to tell somebody is Jewish. A man. Does he have a yarmulke on, or does he not? Not all Jews wear yarmulkes, but most people wearing yarmulkes are Jewish. It's easy. You put it on the top of your head. Yes, it does make you go bald, as I am living proof of. But again, the yarmulke was the first thing we really got rid of because in America, because it made us so obviously different. You could wear a hat, but not the yarmulke or the yarmulke under hat. So you'll see pictures of Jews going to services with their top hats all the time. Must have been really hard to see whoever was leading services because you didn't take it off. But the yarmulke, or the kippah, yarmulke is Yiddish, kippah is Hebrew, has been a symbol that helps us easily define ourselves as Jewish. We cover our heads to honor God, and people see us and know we're Jewish. Other people know we're Jewish. In the Talmud, it says, Rav Huna, the son of Rav Yehoshua, would not walk more than 4 cubits with an uncovered head. He said, God's presence is above me. So the yarmulke is, with probably, and the Star of David, 2 of the most important symbols that are unequivocally not mentioned biblically at all. There's nothing about the Star of David and nothing about the yarmulke in the Bible at all. We don't see it. In the 17th century, Rabbi David Halevi wrote, "It seems to me that it is utterly prohibited to be with head uncovered for a different reason. Since it is the norm right now amongst the non-Jews to remove the hat as soon as they sit down, it cannot be included in the general prohibition. Do not follow any of their laws. And certainly not in the case where the reason for covering the head is to indicate one's awareness of God." So in the 17th century, he's writing, we cover our heads because when a non-Jew goes into a room, what does that non-Jew do? Take off your hat, you're going inside. So we do it to be different. He quotes, "Do not follow any of their laws." That's the quote he uses. Do not follow any of their laws. A better quote would be, cover your heads. That would be a much better quote from the Bible. But why doesn't he use a quote from the Bible that says you must cover your head to honor God? Because it is not there. There is no reference to covering our heads anywhere in the Bible at all. It is a much later tradition, maybe coming 2,000 years ago. Mostly because people like to wear hats. It could have been because we wanted to be different. And that was one of the reasons to wear a hat all the time, to be different from other people who only wore it in certain times and who took it off when they went inside. So these are questions that are interesting to us because the yarmulke has become so popular as a Jewish symbol, even though the skull cap is not original to the Bible. It's nowhere at all. And so, in fact, even in the Talmud, when they talk about what you're supposed to do, it never says you're supposed to wear a yarmulke. Nowhere we see it's expected for boys to wear yarmulke. Now, there is a text that says you shall not uncover the nakedness of your head in Deuteronomy. And that is the only place where it says, well, maybe that means we're supposed to wear something. But there's nothing particularly religious about the yarmulke. If I drop my tallis, what do? I pick it up and I
Kiss it.
kiss it. If I drop the Torah or a prayer book, I kiss it when I pick it up, or the Torah, I fast for 40 days. If you drop the yarmulke, are you supposed to kiss it? No, because it is not holy. Because the rule is not wear a yarmulke. What is the rule that we find in Talmud? The rule is cover your head. That's the rule. So if I wear my cowboy hat to services, that is actually following the rule just like anybody else. When I worked at a Jewish camp, a more traditional camp, and boys would wear those baseball caps all day long. The boys who spent all day in the heat running around and never took baths. Those disgusting caps, and they're holding the cap when they came in for lunch. What did we tell them? Put the cap back on. You're coming to lunch.
I had to leave it on.
They're not holy in terms of cleanliness, because they basically had every germ on planet Earth. So at some point, 2,000 years ago or so, this covering became a little bit more popular. A smaller covering that was easy to wear, that people who didn't like hats could wear. And that became a tradition or a custom, not the law. So we still do that to this day. For this tradition or this custom has gone on a very long time, the skull cap, even though there's nothing holy about it. So I can throw this on the floor, whatever, Larry.
The traditions that we're talking about, were they explicitly stated as though they applied only to men?
Now, if you're using the reference from Deuteronomy 22, no, it does not say that. In fact, in the Talmud, it does say it, but I have to look that up. I don't remember if it said just for men, but it is understood it's just for men. I believe it is stated that way. But again, there is nothing in Judaism that says a woman can't cover her head.
Now, in the Orthodox or ultra-Orthodox, the women, of course, wear the wigs, the shtetls.
Right.
Is that biblical at all?
It's not biblical, but it's based on the same premise of covering your head. So you can cover your head. For women, it's a different reason. For men, it's to honor God. For women, it is to create a sense of modesty. Not all women in the shtetls wore wigs. Only married women did. And still to this day, the shadel. There's different ways of covering your head for women. It is still covering your head, although it is considered in many ways for that modesty reason as opposed to honor God. But by being modest, you are honoring God. By being modest, so it does work that way, just not directly. But it's interesting that this tradition is not biblical at all, except for that one little reference, which is not very specific at all. So if we're asking when did we start wearing the kippah or covering our heads, probably around 2,000 years ago. Now, again, it's really become settled in the Jewish world that covering your head with the yarmulke, this is really kind of the custom that's found in most Jewish texts. Sometimes it's a bigger one. We've seen those bigger ones, but it is really traditional to cover your head. Now, some people do it all the time. Some people only do it during services, and some people never do it. But that's just how we work. Obviously, the covering your head in America has become a lot more popular. Even if you were Orthodox in the 19th and early 20th, mid 20th century, you possibly did not wear a yarmulke all the time. You didn't wear it to work, you didn't wear it because you wanted to be American, you wanted to fit in. Unless you were in these sects that were completely set apart, then you could. But even today, you'll see people who are considered Orthodox who do not wear it except to shul because they want to be part of everything else. But as we've become America, and being different is not punishment anymore or create any isolation or prohibit you from doing business, especially. That was probably the main reason. If you felt like you're wearing a yarmulke was going to keep you from making a living, you didn't wear it. That is not the case because most people don't care about it. If they're making a deal with you and you're Jewish and wearing a yarmulke, if it's a good deal, 99% of the people are going to do it. So that is really, the idea of capitalism, for all its faults, has really brought the Jewish world into the business world. You just look at Muslim countries that denounce Israel all the time, but under the table, what are they doing? They're still doing business. Business is business. And so that is really so we'll continue with some symbols and go into the Jewish star next week, because that is very much more interesting in terms of Kabbalah and all of these mystical viewpoints of the Star of David. The most important thing historically for us to remember is the symbol has been around for maybe 2,000 years, but it's only been considered the symbol of Judaism for a couple of hundred. And we'll look at why that happened. So have a good week. For those of you wondering, we've got coming up, of course, this weekend we have services. We're celebrating. It's going to be Ron, our president, Harriet's birthday. They're going to be sponsoring lunch. July 13th is our annual anniversary service. So we'll have a big shindig on that. That is July 13th, Saturday, July 13th. And also for those of you, I believe, for Friday night, July 19th, we're going to have an exotic Shabbat like we used to have every week, where we go to somebody's house, have a potluck, and have a short service. It's going to be at Wendy Elovich's house in just outside Sun City. So that's for everybody there if you guys want to come. Lou, you're saying she lives closer to Hilton Head?
Yeah, she lives in Moss Creek, just at the bottom of the bridge.
Right, so she's closer to Hilton Head. So everybody who is out there is welcome. It'll be obviously more fun to come together. If anybody needs rides, let us know. We can probably get rides for people for that. All right. Everyone, I'm glad you're safe. Enjoy vacation. Enjoy relaxing after you've come back from vacation. And also remember that in August, Flossie's been so kind, I think, to offer her home, as we're going to start having once a month weekly Wednesday classes starting on, I think it is August 14th. So that'll be the first one in person. So we'll have lunch and do all the wonderful things. All right. Any other announcements or anything else? Welcome back, Lou. Hope you had, again, great time in Canada.
Thank you. Yep.
Larry, all our best in New Jersey. And everyone be safe. And we'll see you next week on the Wednesday class that shall not be named, as we talk about Jewish symbols.
All right.
All right, guys.